A knife flashed in the Arizona sun as three young men circled an elderly veteran in a wheelchair. Maria Rodriguez stepped between them without hesitation. 24 hours later, bleeding bandages still wrapped around her arm, she would receive an invitation that would change everything she thought she knew about her own worth. What happened next left an entire graduation ceremony speechless and proved that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear surgical scrubs stained with other people's blood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Phoenix heat pressed down like a weight on Maria Rodriguez's shoulders as she walked across the cracked asphalt parking lot of Valley Community Medical Center. Even at 7 in the morning, the desert sun promised another scorching day, the kind that made the mountains shimmer like mirages in the distance. She clutched a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and her volunteer badge in the other, the same routine she'd followed for 3 years since leaving her job as a trauma nurse. Maria had always been an early riser. Old habits from her army days, when dawn meant the difference between life and death in the field hospitals of Afghanistan. Now, at 45, those habits served a different purpose. The Veterans Support Center inside the medical complex opened at 8, but Maria liked to arrive early, to sit with the men and women who couldn't sleep through the night, who found themselves wandering the halls before sunrise because their dreams were too heavy to carry into daylight. She wore simple clothes today, faded jeans, a white cotton blouse, and worn sneakers that had walked countless miles through hospital corridors. Nothing about her appearance suggested the Purple Heart tucked away in a drawer at home, or the commendations for saving 17 lives during a mortar attack outside Kandahar. Maria had learned long ago that some stories didn't need to be told, some medals didn't need to be worn. The work spoke for itself. As she approached the main entrance, she noticed a commotion near the side parking area. 3 young men, probably in their early 20s, had surrounded someone in a wheelchair. Their voices carried across the morning. Stillness, loud and aggressive, cutting through the peaceful desert air like broken glass. "Come on, old man, just move out of the way. We need this spot." "There's plenty of other spaces," came a weary voice from the wheelchair. "This one's marked for disabled parking." "Disabled? You look fine to me. Just get up and walk." Maria's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. She recognized that voice in the wheelchair, Bobby Thompson, a Vietnam veteran who came to the center twice a week for physical therapy. Bobby was 72 years old, had lost both legs to an IED in the Mekong Delta, and carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen too much and survived anyway. The 3 men were circling him now, their body language growing more threatening. One wore a tank top that showed off elaborate tattoos covering his arms. Another kept bouncing on his toes like he was itching for a fight. The third, clearly the leader, wore expensive sunglasses and designer jeans that probably cost more than Bobby's monthly disability check. "Look, Grandpa," the leader said, leaning down until he was eye level with Bobby. "We're already late for work. Just move your little cart somewhere else, and nobody gets hurt." Maria's hand tightened around her coffee cup. She had seen this before, young men who had never worn a uniform, never carried a weapon for anything other than their own ego, never spent a single night wondering if they'd see another sunrise. They looked at veterans like Bobby and saw weakness, vulnerability, an easy target for their frustrations. They had no idea who they were messing with. Bobby Thompson had survived 13 months in the jungle. He had carried wounded soldiers through rice paddies under enemy fire. He had earned a Bronze Star for holding a landing zone while helicopters evacuated casualties, firing his rifle from a prone position even after shrapnel had shattered his legs. But looking at him now, slumped in his wheelchair with gray hair and liver-spotted hands, these kids saw only an obstacle. "I'm not moving," Bobby said quietly. "This is a legal parking space, and I have every right to use it." The leader's face darkened. "Legal? You want to talk about legal, old man?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out something that caught the morning light, a folding knife, the blade barely 3 inches long but sharp enough to do damage. The casual way he flicked it open told Maria this wasn't the first time he'd used intimidation to get what he wanted. "Maybe we should teach you some manners," he said, stepping closer to Bobby's wheelchair. That's when Maria moved. She didn't think about it, didn't weigh the options or consider the consequences. 20 years of military training and medical emergency response kicked in like muscle memory. She dropped her coffee cup, heard it shatter against the asphalt, and was crossing the parking lot before the sound faded. "Hey," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Step away from him. Now." The 3 men turned toward her, and Maria could see the calculations running behind their eyes. She was a middle-aged Latina woman, 5'4", wearing civilian clothes. To them, she probably looked like someone's mother heading to work at the gift shop. They had no idea she could field strip an M4 rifle in 30 seconds, that she had performed emergency surgery in a foxhole while mortars exploded overhead, that she had once carried a wounded soldier 3 miles through enemy territory because the evacuation helicopter couldn't land. "Mind your own business, lady," the leader said, but he kept the knife visible, using it to gesture dismissively in her direction. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me now," Maria said, continuing to walk toward them. Her voice was calm, steady, the same tone she had used to talk wounded soldiers through life-threatening procedures. "Put the knife away and walk away. Nobody needs to get hurt today." The leader laughed, a sound like breaking bottles. "You gonna make us, abuela?" Maria stopped about 10 feet away from them, close enough to act but far enough to maintain tactical advantage. She could feel Bobby watching her, could sense his relief mixed with worry for her safety. Behind her, she heard car doors slamming as other early arrivals noticed the confrontation and started moving closer. "I'm asking you nicely," Maria said. "This man is a veteran. He served his country with honor. Show some respect." "Respect?" The leader's voice rose. "For this broken-down old man taking up space? I don't think so." He took a step toward Bobby's wheelchair, the knife still in his hand. "Maybe I should carve some respect into that wheelchair of his." That's when Maria's training took over completely. She moved forward in a rush, closing the distance before the leader could react. Her left hand shot out and grabbed his wrist, the one holding the knife, while her right hand drove into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over. But as he folded, his reflexes kicked in, and the knife swept upward in a wild arc. Maria felt the blade slice across her left forearm, cutting through fabric and skin like it was paper. Hot blood began to flow immediately, but she didn't let go of his wrist. Instead, she twisted it sharply until he cried out and dropped the weapon. The other 2 men rushed her then, but Maria had been in worse situations with worse odds. She pivoted left, using the leader's momentum to swing him into one of his friends, sending both of them tumbling to the ground. The third man grabbed her from behind, trying to pin her arms, but Maria drove her elbow back into his ribs and heard him gasp. "Stop!" Bobby's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop it right now." But the fight was already over. Maria stood in the center of the group, blood dripping from her arm onto the hot asphalt, while the 3 men picked themselves up and backed away. The leader was holding his wrist and glaring at her with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You crazy witch," he spat. "You could have killed me." "If I wanted to kill you," Maria said quietly, "you'd already be dead." The statement hung in the air like a prophecy. Something in her voice, in the way she stood perfectly balanced despite her injury, convinced all 3 men that she was telling the truth. "This isn't over," the leader said, but he was already backing toward his car, his friends trailing behind him like wounded animals. "Yes, it is," Maria replied. "And if I see you anywhere near this medical center again, if I hear about you bothering any veteran, any patient, any person just trying to live their life in peace, we're going to have a very different conversation." They left without another word, tires squealing as they sped out of the parking lot. Only then did Maria allow herself to look down at her arm, where blood was soaking through her white blouse. "Maria, dear God," Bobby said, wheeling his chair toward her. "You're hurt." She knelt down beside his wheelchair, partly to examine her wound and partly because the adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her feeling shaky. "I'm okay, Bobby. It's not deep." But even as she said it, she could see that it was worse than she'd initially thought. The knife had cut through muscle as well as skin, and she was going to need stitches. Her medical training told her she should get inside immediately, find a doctor, get proper treatment. "Why did you do that?" Bobby asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You could have been killed." Maria looked up at him, this man who had given 2 legs for his country and was still being disrespected by kids who had never sacrificed anything for anyone. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said simply. Around them, a small crowd had gathered. Other early arrivals at the medical center, some staff members who had heard the commotion, a security guard who was speaking rapidly into his radio. Maria could hear someone calling for a doctor, could see people pointing at her bloody arm and talking in urgent whispers. But all she could focus on was Bobby Thompson, this quiet hero sitting in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his weathered face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Nobody stood up for me like that in 30 years, he whispered. Maria reached out with her uninjured hand and grasped his. "Then they haven't been paying attention," she said. The medical center staff took over then, helping Maria inside, cleaning and bandaging her wound, asking questions about what had happened. Someone had called the police, who took statements from witnesses and promised to look for the 3 men. A doctor examined her arm and confirmed she would need several stitches but that no permanent damage had been done. Through it all, Maria downplayed her actions. She was just a volunteer who had seen someone in trouble and tried to help. Nothing special, nothing heroic, just basic human decency. When reporters from the local news station showed up, apparently someone had filmed the incident on their phone and posted it online. She declined to be interviewed. "I don't need recognition," she told the persistent journalist. "I just need Bobby and every other veteran to know they're not alone." By the time she finally made it home that evening, her arm wrapped in professional bandages and her blouse replaced with a medical center t-shirt, Maria was exhausted. She lived in a small adobe house in South Phoenix, the kind of neighborhood where people looked out for each other and where a purple heart on the wall meant something. Her daughter Jessica was waiting for her, pacing in the living room like a caged animal. At 22, Jessica was everything Maria had hoped she would become: smart, compassionate, driven. She was finishing her senior year at Arizona State University, planning to follow her mother into medicine, though she had her sights set on becoming a doctor rather than a nurse. "Mom, I saw the video," Jessica said the moment Maria walked through the door. "The whole internet is talking about it. Are you okay? How bad is your arm? Why didn't you call me?" Maria sank into her favorite chair, a worn leather recliner that had belonged to her father. "I'm fine, Mija. Just some stitches. Nothing I haven't dealt with before." But Jessica wasn't buying it. She had inherited her mother's medical instincts and could read the signs of shock and exhaustion that Maria was trying to hide. "Mom, you took on 3 guys with a knife. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Maria said gently. "And neither was Bobby. That's what matters." Jessica knelt beside her mother's chair, her eyes searching Maria's face. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Scared out of my mind, but proud." They sat together in comfortable silence as the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Maria's arm throbbed, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that reminded her she had made a difference today. Tomorrow she would go back to the Veterans Center, back to the quiet work of helping people heal from wounds both visible and invisible. She had no idea that tomorrow would bring an invitation that would change everything she thought she knew about her own impact on the world. She had no idea that her simple act of defending a fellow veteran would ripple outward in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew was that when she looked in the mirror that night, removing her bandages to check the wound, she liked what she saw. Not the cut on her arm, but the woman who had earned it. A woman who stood up. A woman who didn't back down. A woman who understood that some things were worth fighting for, worth bleeding for. A woman who had no idea that in less than 24 hours, 8 men would converge on Phoenix from across the country, carrying a story about a field medic who had saved their lives in Afghanistan, a story they had been waiting 15 years to tell. Maria's phone rang at exactly 7:30. The next morning, cutting through the desert silence like a blade. She had been awake for an hour already, sitting on her back patio with coffee and ice for her throbbing arm, watching the sun climb over the Superstition Mountains. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the persistence of the ring made her answer. "Mrs. Rodriguez? This is Dean Catherine Walsh from Arizona State University." Maria nearly dropped her coffee. Arizona State was where Jessica was finishing her senior year, where graduation ceremonies were scheduled for the following weekend. Her first thought was that something had happened to her daughter, some emergency that required a parent's immediate attention. "Is Jessica okay?" Maria asked, her voice tight with worry. "Oh yes, absolutely. Jessica is fine. Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm calling about you." The words hung in the morning air like a question mark. Maria had no connection to Arizona State beyond being the mother of a student. She had never donated money to the university, never attended alumni events, never even been on campus except to drop Jessica off freshman year and attend a few family weekends. "I'm not sure I understand," Maria said carefully. Dean Walsh's voice carried a warmth that seemed genuine. "Mrs. Rodriguez, yesterday's incident at Valley Community Medical Center has come to our attention. The video has been viewed nearly 2 million times since it was posted. The way you defended Mr. Thompson, your courage under pressure, your selfless actions, it's exactly the kind of character we want to highlight at our commencement ceremonies." Maria felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She had seen what viral videos could do to people's lives, how they could twist a simple moment into something larger than it was meant to be. "Dean Walsh, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not looking for any kind of recognition. I just did what anyone should do." "That's exactly why we want you to be our keynote speaker." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Keynote speaker. At a university graduation. In front of thousands of people. The thought made her palms sweat despite the morning chill. "There's been some mistake," Maria said quickly. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not anyone important. I work at a veterans center. I volunteer. I don't give speeches. Mrs. Rodriguez, may I tell you something? Dean Walsh's voice took on a different quality, more personal, more urgent. 15 years ago, I was Lieutenant Catherine Walsh, serving with the 10th Mountain Division in Afghanistan. I was part of a convoy that hit an IED outside Kandahar. 3 vehicles, 12 soldiers. Chaos and fire and screaming. The field medic who saved my life, who kept me conscious while they airlifted me to Germany, who wrote a letter to my parents when I was too weak to hold a pen, her name was Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. The coffee cup slipped from Maria's fingers and shattered on the patio stones. The sound seemed to echo across the desert, mixing with the sudden rush of memories she had spent years trying to quiet. Afghanistan. The convoy. The explosion that had turned a routine patrol into a nightmare of twisted metal and burning fuel. She remembered Catherine Walsh now. A young lieutenant, barely 23, with bright eyes and a quick smile that reminded Maria of her own daughter. She had taken shrapnel in the abdomen, had been bleeding internally, dying slowly while they waited for the medevac helicopter that seemed like it would never come. Kate, Maria whispered, the nickname she had used during those long hours in the field hospital. Kate Walsh. You were going to be a teacher. I did become a teacher, Dean Walsh said, and Maria could hear the smile in her voice. I just teach at a higher level now. Mrs. Rodriguez, you saved my life. You saved more lives that day than I could count. And then you just disappeared. No forwarding address when you left the service, no social media presence, nothing. I've been looking for you for 15 years. Maria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of old memories pressing down on her shoulders. That day in Afghanistan had been one of the worst of her military career, a day when everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But it had also been one of her best days, because everyone had made it home alive. I didn't disappear, Maria said quietly. I just came home and tried to live a normal life. There's nothing normal about what you did that day. Or yesterday, for that matter. Dean Walsh's voice grew more urgent. Maria, can I call you Maria? Our graduation ceremony is this Saturday. We have 30,000 graduates, their families, faculty, staff. We were planning to have a politician give the keynote address, someone who's never served, never sacrificed, never put their life on the line for anyone else. But after seeing that video, after remembering what you did for me, and so many others, I know who really deserves to be on that stage. Maria shook her head even though Dean Walsh couldn't see her. I can't do that. I don't know how to give speeches. I wouldn't know what to say. You wouldn't have to say much. Just tell them what you told that reporter yesterday, that people aren't alone. Tell them what you taught me in that field hospital, that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of fear. Tell them what you've spent your entire life showing, that real heroes don't wear capes, they just show up when they're needed. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Dean Walsh sharing details about the ceremony, about her own recovery and career, about the impact that one field medic had made on her life and the lives of countless others. But Maria's mind was elsewhere, spinning through the implications of what was being asked of her. A keynote address at a major university graduation. Her daughter's graduation, though Jessica didn't know yet. Speaking in front of 30,000 people about topics she had never talked about publicly, her military service, her experiences in Afghanistan, the reasons she had chosen a life of quiet service rather than seeking recognition. When she finally hung up the phone, promising to give Dean Walsh an answer by the end of the day, Maria sat in the desert silence and tried to process what had just happened. In less than 24 hours, her life had taken a turn she never could have anticipated. From a simple act of defending a fellow veteran to being offered one of the highest honors a university could bestow. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. Mom, did you see the news this morning? You're famous. Channel 12 led with your story. I'm so proud of you. Maria smiled despite her confusion. Jessica had always been her anchor, the reason. She had left the military and chosen a quieter life. Everything she had done since leaving Afghanistan had been for her daughter, working multiple jobs to put her through school, volunteering at the Veterans Center partly to stay connected to her military family but mostly to show Jessica the importance of service. Now Jessica was about to graduate with honors from one of the top pre-med programs in the country, accepted to medical school, ready to begin her own journey of healing and helping others. And Maria was being asked to speak at that graduation, to share her story with thousands of people including her own daughter. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she had deflected Jessica's questions about her military service, had kept her commendations and medals hidden in a drawer, had insisted that her time in Afghanistan was just a job like any other. She had wanted to protect her daughter from the weight of those memories, from the knowledge of what she had seen and done in the service of her country. But maybe, Maria thought as she swept up the broken coffee cup, it was time for Jessica to understand who her mother really was. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and visitors. Word of Dean Walsh's invitation had somehow leaked. Maria suspected the dean had called the local news stations, and by noon, reporters were knocking on her door again. She refused all interviews, but she could see the news vans parked on her street, could hear the helicopters circling overhead. Bobby Thompson called around lunchtime, his voice thick with emotion. "Maria, I can't believe what's happening. They want you to give a speech at the university?" "I haven't decided yet," Maria told him, though even as she said it, she realized that wasn't entirely true. Some part of her, the part that had spent 20 years hiding from recognition, was already making peace with the idea of stepping into the light. "You have to do it," Bobby said. "You have to tell them what it means to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. You have to tell them what real service looks like." After she hung up with Bobby, Maria found herself standing in front of her bedroom dresser, looking at the drawer she hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside were her military commendations, her Purple Heart, the photos she had taken in Afghanistan but never shared with anyone. At the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was the letter she had written to Catherine Walsh's parents, the one she had never sent because Kate had recovered and written to them herself. She pulled out the letter now, unfolding the yellowed paper carefully. Her own handwriting stared back at her, words she had written in a field hospital while mortars exploded in the distance. "Your daughter is the bravest person I have ever met. She asked me to tell you that she loves you, that she's not afraid, that she's proud to serve alongside the finest soldiers in the world. She asked me to tell you that if something happens to her, you should know that her life had meaning, that she made a difference. But I want you to know something else, she's not going anywhere. Not on my watch. I give you my word that I will bring her home." Maria had kept that promise. Kate Walsh had made it home, had recovered from her injuries, had become a teacher and eventually a dean. She had built a life, had presumably married and had children and contributed to her community. She had taken the second chance that Maria's medical skills had given her and used it to make the world a better place. Now Kate was asking Maria to step forward, to accept recognition for the service she had spent years trying to forget. It would mean standing on a stage in front of thousands of people, sharing parts of her story that she had kept private for 15 years. It would mean Jessica learning things about her mother's past that she had never known. But it would also mean something else. It would mean that all those soldiers she had saved, all those lives she had touched, would finally have their stories told. It would mean that Bobby Thompson and millions of other veterans would see that their service mattered, that someone was willing to stand up and remind the world of their sacrifices. Maria's phone rang again. This time it was Jessica, calling from campus. "Mom, I just heard about Dean Walsh's invitation. Is it true? Are you really going to be the keynote speaker at my graduation?" Maria took a deep breath. "Would you want me to?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Jessica spoke again, her voice was soft with wonder. "Mom, I've spent my whole life watching you help people, watching you put everyone else first, watching you serve without ever asking for anything in return. But I've also spent my whole life knowing there were parts of your story you never told me. If you're ready to tell that story, if you're ready to let people see who you really are, then yes. I want you to do it." After she hung up with Jessica, Maria called Dean Walsh back. "I'll do it," she said simply. "Maria, thank you. You have no idea what this means. Actually, I think I do. But Dean Walsh, there's something you should know. I'm not going to give you a polished speech. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not. If I do this, I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. That's all we want," Dean Walsh replied. The truth. That evening, as Maria sat at her kitchen table trying to figure out what she would say to 30,000 people in 5 days, her doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone, and she had been avoiding the reporters who were still camped outside. But when she looked through the peephole, she saw a man in his 40s standing on her porch, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, holding what looked like a manila envelope. She opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock in place. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, and something about his expression seemed familiar. "Sergeant Rodriguez? I'm Master Sergeant David Chen, retired. I served with the 82nd Airborne in Afghanistan. I think you might remember me." Maria's breath caught. She did remember him, Corporal Chen, barely 19 years old, who had taken shrapnel in the leg during a firefight outside Bagram. She had operated on him in a forward operating base medical tent, had saved his leg when the other medics wanted to amputate. "David," she said, unlocking the chain and opening the door fully. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing 7 other guys are doing," he said, handing her the envelope. "We've been looking for you for 15 years. When that video went viral, when Dean Walsh announced you'd be giving the keynote address, we all made some phone calls. We're here to make sure you understand what Saturday really means. Maria opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single piece of paper, signed by 8 different men in 8 different handwritings. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez saved our lives in Afghanistan. She didn't just patch our wounds, she gave us futures. We are teachers, fathers, business owners, police officers, firefighters, and public servants because she refused to let us die in the desert. On Saturday, we will be in the audience when she takes the stage, not just to honor her, but to show the world what 20 years of her impact looks like. She taught us that heroes don't seek recognition. But sometimes, heroes need to let recognition find them. Maria looked up at David Chen, this boy she had saved who had become a man she barely recognized. How did you find the others? Social media, mostly. Military networks. Once we started looking, it wasn't that hard. We've all been successful, Sergeant. We've all built lives because you gave us the chance to. And we all remember the woman who never asked for a thank you, never expected recognition, just did her job and saved our lives. They talked for an hour on her front porch, David sharing stories about the other men who would be coming to Phoenix for the graduation ceremony. Men who had families now, careers, children who would never exist if Maria hadn't been there on the worst days of their lives. As David prepared to leave, he paused at the bottom of her porch steps. Sergeant, can I ask you something? Why did you disappear after the war? Why didn't you stay in touch, let us thank you? Maria considered the question carefully. Because I didn't want my service to define me. I wanted to come home and just be a mother, just be a person living a normal life. I thought if I stayed connected to all of that, I'd never be able to move forward. David nodded slowly. I understand. But can I tell you something? Your service doesn't define you. It reveals you. It shows who you were all along, someone who runs toward danger when others run away, someone who puts other people's lives before their own, someone who makes the world better just by being in it. That didn't start in Afghanistan, and it didn't end there either. It's who you are. After he left, Maria sat on her porch as the desert stars emerged overhead. In 3 days, she would stand in front of 30,000 people and try to explain what service meant, what courage looked like, what it meant to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She still didn't know exactly what she would say. But for the first time since Dean Walsh had called, she was beginning to understand why it mattered. Not for her own recognition, but for every Bobby Thompson sitting in a wheelchair, for every young soldier learning what it meant to serve, for every person who had ever wondered if their sacrifices made a difference. Saturday was going to change everything. Maria could feel it in the desert wind, in the weight of the envelope David Chen had left behind, in the quiet pride that was beginning to replace her fear. She was ready to tell her story. She was ready to step into the light. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear desert sky that made Phoenix look like a postcard. Maria stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection and wondering how her life had led to this moment. In 3 hours, she would be speaking to 30,000 people at Arizona State University's graduation ceremony. Her arm still ached from the knife wound, hidden now beneath the sleeve of her best dress, a simple navy blue outfit she had bought for Jessica's high school graduation 4 years ago. She had spent the past 3 days writing and rewriting her speech, filling legal pads with words that never seemed quite right. How do you explain 20 years of military service to people who had never held a rifle? How do you describe the weight of saving lives to an audience of college graduates worried about student loans and job interviews? How do you talk about sacrifice to people who had never been asked to sacrifice anything? The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock, just as Maria was applying lipstick with hands that trembled slightly. She opened the door to find David Chen standing on her porch again, but this time he wasn't alone. 7 other men stood behind him in a semicircle, all wearing suits and ties, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of military veterans. Good morning, Sergeant, David said with a smile. We thought you might like some company on the drive to the university. Maria recognized each face, though some had changed more than others over the 15 years since Afghanistan. There was Marcus Williams, the young private who had lost his hearing in one ear to an explosion but had gone on to become a high school principal. James Morrison, who had taken a bullet through the shoulder and now ran a construction company that hired exclusively veterans. Robert Kim, who had been burned over 30% of his body and now worked as a firefighter, running into flames to save others the way Maria had once run into gunfire to save him. They were older now, grayer, wearing the soft edges that came with civilian life and family responsibilities. But when they looked at her, Maria could see the young soldiers they had been, could remember the fear and pain in their eyes during those terrible days in the Afghan desert. You didn't have to come all this way, Maria said, though she was grateful for their presence in a way she couldn't express. Actually, we did, said Thomas Bradley, who had been barely 18 when Maria had saved his life during a mortar attack. He was 43 now, a father of 3, a successful lawyer who had built his career around helping other veterans navigate disability claims. Sergeant, you've spent 15 years deflecting recognition for what you did over there. Today, that ends. They drove to the university in a convoy of rental cars, Maria riding with David while the others followed behind. The campus was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. Families were streaming towards Sun Devil Stadium, graduates in caps and gowns taking photos with proud parents, vendors selling bottled water and commemorative programs. Maria's stomach churned as they pulled into the VIP parking area near the stadium. She could see the massive structure looming ahead, could hear the crowd noise already building as 30,000 people found their seats. Somewhere in that crowd was Jessica, probably nervous about her own moment of recognition as a summa cum laude graduate. Somewhere else was Bobby Thompson, who had insisted on attending despite the difficulty of navigating such a large venue. In his wheelchair, Dean Walsh was waiting for them in the faculty staging area, a woman in her late 30s with intelligent eyes and a warm smile that reminded Maria immediately of the young lieutenant she had saved all those years ago. She was dressed in full academic regalia, the colorful hood and cap that marked her rank within the university hierarchy. Maria, she said, embracing her carefully to avoid jostling the injured arm. You look perfect. How are you feeling? Terrified, Maria admitted. Good. That means it matters to you. Dean Walsh turned to acknowledge the 8 veterans who had accompanied Maria. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. We've reserved seats for you in the front section, directly facing the podium. We want to make sure the camera catches your faces when Sergeant Rodriguez takes the stage. Cameras? Maria felt her stomach drop. Another notch. Local news affiliates, the university's streaming service, probably some social media coverage. Nothing too intrusive, I promise. But Maria, people want to hear your story. The video from the medical center has been viewed over 5 million times now. There are news crews here from Phoenix, Tucson, even some national outlets. They spent the next hour in the faculty lounge, going over the logistics of the ceremony. Maria would be introduced by the university president, would speak for approximately 15 minutes, then would remain on stage for the conferring of degrees. Jessica was scheduled to walk in the first group of graduates, the summa cum laude recipients who had maintained perfect grade point averages throughout their undergraduate careers. As they talked, Maria became aware of a commotion outside the lounge. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with security personnel. Through the window, she could see a small crowd gathering near the faculty entrance to the stadium. What's going on out there? David asked, moving to get a better view. Dean Walsh frowned and stepped outside to investigate. She returned a few minutes later with a grim expression. We have a situation. Apparently, someone has been questioning your credentials for speaking at the ceremony. They're claiming you're not qualified to give a keynote address at a major university. Who's questioning them? Thomas Bradley asked, his lawyer instincts immediately engaged. A group of faculty members and some community leaders. They're saying that viral video fame doesn't qualify someone to address 30,000 graduates and their families. They want to see your academic credentials, your speaking experience, your published works. Maria felt the familiar weight of imposter syndrome settling over her shoulders. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a nurse who had gotten lucky with a viral video. Maybe she had no business standing on a stage with distinguished academics and accomplished professionals. They're demanding that the university administration reconsider the decision, Dean Walsh continued. They've filed a formal complaint with the Board of Trustees. The 8 veterans exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that only comes from shared combat experience. David Chen stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that Maria remembered from their time in Afghanistan. Dean Walsh, who exactly is leading this complaint? Dr. Harrison Wells, chair of the Political Science Department. Dr. Margaret Foster from the Business School. Councilman Richard Patterson from the Phoenix City Council. A few others. Marcus Williams pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Within minutes, he was showing the screen to his fellow veterans. Dr. Harrison Wells, age 57, tenured professor for 23 years. Never served in the military. Published extensively on international relations and conflict resolution, but never actually been in a conflict zone. Dr. Margaret Foster, Business School, wrote her dissertation on leadership theory but has never led anything more dangerous than a faculty committee meeting. What's your point? Dean Walsh asked. Our point, said James Morrison, is that these people are about to learn something about real credentials. Dean Walsh looked confused, but Maria was beginning to understand. She had seen this look in her soldiers' eyes before, the quiet determination that preceded decisive action. They weren't going to let a group of academics and politicians diminish her service or her right to speak about sacrifice and courage. "Gentlemen," she said carefully, "I appreciate your support, but I don't want to cause any more controversy. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should just withdraw and let them find someone more appropriate." "No," Davidson said flatly. "Not happening. Sergeant, you saved our lives. You gave us futures. You showed us what real leadership looks like under the worst possible circumstances. If these people think academic credentials are more important than that, they're about to get an education." Robert Kim stepped forward, his scarred hands clasped behind his back in a military at-ease position. "Dean Walsh, is there a way for us to address these complaints directly? We'd like to speak to this committee before the ceremony begins. I suppose we could arrange a brief meeting. But gentlemen, I should warn you, these are not unreasonable people. They're concerned about the university's reputation, about maintaining academic standards. They're not trying to be malicious." "We understand," Thomas Bradley said with the calm confidence of a man who had argued cases before the Supreme Court. "We just want to provide some context they might not have considered." The meeting was arranged for 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. It took place in a conference room adjacent to the stadium, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the crowd still filing into their seats. Dr. Wells and Dr. Foster were there, along with Councilman Patterson and 3 other faculty members Maria didn't recognize. The academics looked exactly as Maria had expected, well-dressed, well-educated, comfortable in their authority and certain of their position. Dr. Wells was a distinguished man in his late 50s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Foster was younger, probably mid-40s, with the kind of confident bearing that came from climbing the academic ladder in a male-dominated field. "Dean Walsh," Dr. Wells began without preamble, "we appreciate the sentiment behind today's invitation, but we remain concerned about the precedent this sets. Ms. Rodriguez may be a fine person, but a viral video does not constitute qualification for addressing our graduates." "With respect, Dr. Wells," David Chen interjected, "you might want to hear about Sergeant Rodriguez's actual qualifications before making that determination." "Sergeant?" Dr. Foster looked puzzled. "I thought she was a nurse at a veterans center." "She is," Marcus Williams said. "She's also a decorated combat veteran with 20 years of military service, including multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. She holds the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star with V device for valor, and the Combat Medical Badge. She saved more lives in a single day than most people save in a lifetime." The room fell silent. Maria watched as the academics processed this information, saw the moment when their certainty began to crack. Thomas Bradley opened a folder he had been carrying and began placing documents on the conference table. Military commendations. After-action reports. Testimony from commanding officers. Letters from soldiers whose lives she saved. Medical records showing the complexity of the procedures she performed under combat conditions. In 2009, James Morrison continued, "Sergeant Rodriguez performed a field amputation with a broken bone saw while her forward operating base was under mortar attack. She saved the life of a 19-year-old private who is now a pediatric surgeon in Dallas. In 2011, she carried a wounded soldier 3 miles through enemy territory because the evacuation helicopter couldn't land. That soldier is now a teacher who has influenced thousands of students." Robert Kim stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the small room. "Dr. Wells, you've written extensively about conflict resolution theory. Sergeant Rodriguez resolved conflicts by making sure everyone went home alive. Dr. Foster, you teach leadership principles. Sergeant Rodriguez led by example, showing soldiers how to put others' lives before their own, how to serve with honor and humility." Dr. Wells removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture that Maria recognized as a stalling tactic while he processed what he was hearing. "These are certainly impressive credentials," he said finally. "But our concern remains about her speaking ability, her capacity to address such a large audience." "Her speaking ability?" David Chen's voice carried a note of incredulity. "Dr. Wells, do you know what it takes to talk a 19-year-old soldier through a life-threatening injury while mortars are exploding overhead? Do you understand the communication skills required to coordinate medical evacuations while under enemy fire? Sergeant Rodriguez has been speaking to people in their darkest moments for 20 years, giving them hope when they had none, courage when they were terrified." Dean Walsh had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now she stepped forward. "Dr. Wells, Dr. Foster, I think there's something else you should know. I was Lieutenant Catherine Walsh, 10th Mountain Division, wounded in action outside Kandahar in 2009. Sergeant Rodriguez saved my life. She's the reason I'm standing here today, the reason I became a teacher, the reason I had the opportunity to serve this university. If anyone has earned the right to speak about service, sacrifice, and the values we want our graduates to embody, it's her." The academics exchanged glances, their united front beginning to fracture. Dr. Foster was the first to speak. "Dean Walsh, why wasn't this information included in the original announcement? Why present her simply as a viral video subject rather than a decorated veteran?" "Because," Maria said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the room, "I asked her not to. I didn't want my military service to be the reason for the invitation. I wanted it to be about what happened at the medical center, about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. But these gentlemen are right, my qualifications didn't start with a viral video. They started 25 years ago when I took an oath to serve my country and protect those who couldn't protect themselves." She stood up, her voice growing stronger as she continued. "Dr. Wells, you want to know if I can speak to 30,000 people? I've spoken to dying soldiers, to their families, to commanding officers who needed to make impossible decisions. I've delivered news that no one wanted to hear and comfort that people desperately needed. I may not have a PhD, but I have something else. I have the trust of men and women who bet their lives on my words and my actions." The room was completely silent now. Through the windows, Maria could see the crowd in the stadium, thousands of families waiting to celebrate their children's achievements. Somewhere in that crowd was Jessica, probably wondering if her mother was going to make it to the stage. Dr. Wells put his glasses back on and looked around the table at his colleagues. "I think we may have been hasty in our concerns," he said. Finally. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I apologize for questioning your qualifications. You clearly have more than enough experience to address our graduates." "Thank you," Maria said simply. As the meeting broke up and people began filing out of the conference room, Councilman Patterson approached Maria. He was a man in his 60s with the soft appearance of someone who had spent his career in offices rather than foxholes. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he said, extending his hand. "I want to apologize for my role in questioning your credentials. I served 2 years in the National Guard, stateside duty only. I thought that gave me some understanding of military service. I realize now that I had no idea what real service looked like." Maria shook his hand. "Thank you, Councilman. But please understand, I'm not speaking today because I want recognition for my military service. I'm speaking because I want people to understand that courage comes in many forms, that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform, that standing up for others is something we all can do." As they walked toward the stadium entrance, Dean Walsh fell into step beside Maria. "How are you feeling now?" "Better," Maria admitted. "Still nervous, but better. For a minute there, I thought maybe they were right, maybe I didn't belong on that stage." "Maria, you belong on that stage more than anyone I know. You're not just giving a speech today, you're showing 30,000 people what real heroism looks like." The 8 veterans had waited for them outside the conference room, their faces showing a mixture of pride and protective anger. David Chin approached Maria as they neared the stadium entrance. "Sergeant, how do you want to handle this? We can sit in the audience like originally planned, or we can make a statement." "What kind of statement?" Marcus Williams smiled, the same grin Maria remembered from their time in Afghanistan when he was planning something that would probably get them all in trouble. "The kind that makes sure nobody ever questions your qualifications again." 20 minutes later, Maria stood in the tunnel leading to the stadium field, listening to the university president's introduction echoing over the public address system. Her heart was pounding, but it was a different kind of nervousness now, not fear of inadequacy, but anticipation of finally telling her story. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president's voice boomed across the stadium, "please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, a woman whose courage and selfless service embody the values we hope our graduates will carry into the world. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, United States Army, retired." The crowd's applause was polite but not overwhelming. Most of them knew her only as the woman from the viral video, if they knew her at all. But as Maria walked onto the field and approached the podium, she noticed something that made her breath catch. 8 men had risen from their seats in the front section. They stood at attention, hands at their sides, faces forward, creating a human wall of respect and gratitude. Around them, other audience members began to notice, began to understand that something significant was happening. Maria reached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. 30,000 people, all waiting to hear what she had to say. In the front rows, she could see Jessica beaming with pride, could see Bobby Thompson in his wheelchair giving her a thumbs up. But her eyes kept returning to the 8 men still standing, still holding their position like an honor guard. These soldiers she had saved, these lives she had touched, these men who had traveled across the country to make sure the world understood who was speaking to them. She gripped the podium with both hands, feeling the weight of all the words she had never said, all the stories she had never told, all the recognition she had spent 15 years avoiding. It was time to speak. Time to tell them what service really meant. Time to show them that heroes didn't always wear capes, sometimes they wore scrubs, sometimes they worked at veteran centers, sometimes they were your neighbors and they never asked for anything in return. The stadium fell silent, 30,000 people waiting for her words. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak. Maria's voice carried across the stadium with surprising strength, cutting through the desert air like a blade forged in fire. She had abandoned the formal speech she had written, the careful words crafted to avoid controversy or deep emotion. Instead, she spoke from a place deeper than memory, from the core of who she had always been. When I was 19 years old, she began, her hand steady on the podium now, I thought courage meant not being afraid. I thought heroes were the people who charged into battle without hesitation, who never doubted themselves, who always knew exactly what to do. The crowd was completely silent, 30,000 people leaning forward as if pulled by an invisible force. Even the graduates in their caps and gowns had stopped fidgeting, stopped checking their phones, stopped whispering to their neighbors. I was wrong about all of that, Maria continued. Real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of fear. Real heroes aren't the people who never doubt themselves, they're the people who doubt themselves every day but show up. Anyway, real strength isn't about having all the answers, it's about asking the right questions, especially when those questions are hard. In the front section, the 8 veterans remained standing, their presence a living testament to the words she was speaking. Around them, other audience members had begun to notice, had begun to understand that they were witnessing something more than a typical graduation address. I spent 20 years in the United States Army, Maria said, her voice growing stronger. With each word. I served as a combat medic in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I held dying soldiers in my arms and promised their mothers I would bring them home. I performed surgery in tents while mortars exploded overhead. I carried wounded men through minefields because sometimes that was the only way to save their lives. The camera operators who had been moving casually around the stadium perimeter now stood frozen, their lenses focused entirely on the woman at the podium. This wasn't the feel-good viral video story they had expected to cover. This was something else entirely. But the hardest thing I ever did, Maria continued, wasn't in Afghanistan or Iraq. It wasn't under enemy fire or in a field hospital. The hardest thing I ever did was come home and try to live a normal life, try to be just another person in a world that had moved on while I was away. She paused, her eyes finding Jessica in the sea of graduates. Her daughter was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she heard her mother's story told in full for the first time. For 15 years, I tried to hide from who I had been. I worked quietly, served others without recognition, raised my daughter to believe that heroism was something you read about in books or saw in movies. I convinced myself that my service was in the past, that it didn't define who I was anymore. Maria's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. I was wrong about that too. Service isn't something you do for a few years and then set aside. It's not a uniform you put on and take off. Service is a way of being in the world, a commitment to putting others before yourself, a promise to stand up when standing up is hard. The crowd was completely captivated now. Parents who had come to watch their children graduate found themselves hanging on every word. Faculty members who had questioned her credentials sat in stunned silence. Even the protesters who had gathered outside the stadium to complain about her speaking had grown quiet, their signs forgotten as her words reached them through the loudspeakers. 3 days ago, Maria said, I was just another volunteer at a veterans center, trying to help people heal from wounds both visible and invisible. I thought my story was my own, that it didn't matter to anyone except the people who had lived it with me. But then something happened that changed everything. She gestured toward Bobby Thompson, who was sitting in his wheelchair in the disabled seating section, tears streaming down his weathered face. A 72-year-old veteran, a man who gave his legs for this country, was being harassed by 3 young men who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle. They had a knife. They were threatening him. And in that moment, I had a choice. The stadium was so quiet that Maria could hear the flag snapping in the desert wind behind her. I could have walked away. I could have told myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would handle it, that I had already done my service and didn't owe anyone anything more. Or I could remember what I had learned in 20 years of military service, that we don't abandon our brothers and sisters, that we don't let bullies win, that sometimes standing up is the most important thing you can do. Maria lifted her left arm, showing the bandages that were still visible beneath her sleeve. I chose to stand up. I chose to put myself between a veteran and the people who wanted to hurt him. I chose to act instead of watching, to engage instead of walking away. The applause started slowly, a few scattered claps from the section where the 8 veterans were standing. But it spread quickly, rolling through the stadium like a wave. Graduates stood up, then their families, then faculty members, then everyone. 30,000 people on their feet, applauding not just Maria's actions but the principle she represented. But Maria wasn't finished. She raised her hand for silence, and somehow, impossibly, 30,000 people obeyed. "That's not the end of the story," she said. "Because when I made that choice, when I decided to stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself, I discovered something I had forgotten in 15 years of trying to be invisible." She looked directly at Dean Walsh, who was sitting with the other university administrators on the stage behind her. "I discovered that service creates connections that time and distance can't break. That the people whose lives you touch don't forget you, even when you forget yourself. That heroism isn't a title you earn once and keep forever, it's a choice you make every day, in small moments and large ones, when no one is watching and when everyone is." Maria turned back to the crowd, her voice rising with passion and conviction. "The woman who invited me to speak today is someone I saved 15 years ago in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Catherine Walsh was dying in a field hospital when I promised her parents I would bring her home. I kept that promise. She lived, she healed, she came home and became a teacher and eventually the dean of this university. She didn't forget the medic who saved her life. She spent 15 years looking for me, waiting for the chance to say thank you." The crowd erupted again, but this time the applause was different, deeper, more emotional, charged with the recognition of something profound happening before their eyes. "But here's the thing," Maria said, her voice cutting through the noise. "She didn't need to thank me. Because saving her life, helping her come home, giving her the chance to build a career and touch thousands of other lives, that was its own reward. That's what service really means. Not the recognition, not the medals, not the ceremonies. The reward for service is the knowledge that you made a difference, that someone is alive because of what you did, that the world is a little bit better because you were in it." She paused again, gathering herself for what she needed to say. "Next. Graduates, your families are here today because they're proud of what you've accomplished. And they should be proud. You've worked hard, sacrificed, pushed yourselves to achieve something significant. But as you leave this place and go into the world, I want you to remember something." Maria's voice softened, becoming almost conversational, as if she were talking to each graduate individually. "Your education isn't just about what you've learned, it's about what you're going to do with what you've learned. Your degree isn't just a certificate of achievement, it's a license to serve others. Your success isn't just about what you can accomplish for yourself, it's about how you can lift up the people around you." She gestured toward the 8 veterans, who were still standing at attention in the front section. "These men are here today because 15 years ago, I made a choice to serve others before serving myself. They built careers, raised families, contributed to their communities because someone gave them a second chance. But here's what they taught me this week: service isn't a one-way street. The people you help don't just receive from you. They give back. They make the world better. In their own ways. They create ripples that spread far beyond what you can see or imagine." Maria's voice grew stronger again, filling every corner of the massive stadium. "So when you leave here today, when you start your careers and build your lives, remember that you have a choice. You can use your education and your talents just for yourself, or you can use them to serve something larger. You can walk past people who need help, or you can stop and offer assistance. You can stay silent when you see injustice, or you can speak up for those who can't speak for themselves." The crowd was completely still now, every person in the stadium focused entirely on her words. 3 days ago, I thought my story was finished. I thought I had done my service, raised my daughter, contributed what I could, and that was enough. But these men," she gestured again toward the veterans, "reminded me that service never ends. That the choice to help others, to stand up for what's right, to put community before self, that choice comes up every day, in ways both large and small." Maria looked directly at Jessica, her voice becoming more personal. "To my daughter Jessica, who is graduating today with highest honors, who is going to medical school, who has watched me try to hide from recognition for her entire life, I want you to know that I'm not hiding anymore. I'm proud of my service. I'm proud of the lives I saved. I'm proud of the choice I made 3 days ago to stand up for a fellow veteran. And I'm proud that you've chosen a path of service too, that you're going to spend your life healing people the way I tried to heal people." The emotion in Maria's voice was unmistakable now, carrying across the stadium with raw honesty. "But mostly, I want you to know that heroism isn't something extraordinary that only special people can achieve. Heroism is ordinary people making extraordinary choices when those choices matter most. It's deciding to act when action is needed. It's choosing compassion over indifference, courage over comfort, service over self." She turned back to address the entire crowd. That's what I learned 3 days ago in a hospital parking lot. That's what I learned 15 years ago in the deserts of Afghanistan. That's what I've learned in every moment when I've had to choose between helping someone and helping myself. Service isn't a burden, it's a privilege. The opportunity to make a difference in someone else's life is the greatest gift you can receive. Maria gripped the podium with both hands, delivering her final words with quiet intensity. So graduates, as you walk across this stage today, as you receive your diplomas and begin your careers, remember that your education has given you power. Use that power wisely. Use it to serve others. Use it to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Use it to make the world a better place than you found it. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the entire stadium. Because that's what real heroism looks like. Not a viral video, not a medal ceremony, not a graduation speech. Real heroism looks like showing up every day and choosing to help instead of walking away. It looks like ordinary people doing extraordinary things because those things need to be done. Maria stepped back from the podium, her speech complete. For a moment, the stadium was completely silent, as if 30,000 people were processing everything they had just heard. Then the applause began. It started with the 8 veterans, still standing in the front section, clapping with steady, measured rhythm. The sound carried across the stadium like thunder, and one by one, every person in the arena rose to their feet. Graduates, families, faculty, staff, everyone standing and applauding with an intensity that made the stadium itself seem to vibrate. But this wasn't ordinary applause. This was recognition, gratitude, understanding. This was 30,000 people acknowledging that they had just witnessed something rare and precious, the absolute truth, spoken with humility and courage by someone who had earned the right to speak it. Jessica had broken ranks from the other graduates and was moving toward the stage, tears streaming down her face, her cap and gown billowing behind her as she ran. Other students followed her lead, and within moments, hundreds of graduates were converging on the field, abandoning protocol to reach the woman who had just redefined what it meant to serve. But Maria's eyes were fixed on the 8 veterans, who had finally broken their military bearing and were walking toward the stage with expressions of pride and gratitude that transcended words. These men she had saved, these lives she had touched. These soldiers who had become teachers and fathers and public servants because she had given them the chance. As Dean Walsh approached the podium to introduce the conferring of degrees, she paused beside Maria and whispered, "That wasn't just a speech. That was a calling." Maria nodded, understanding finally what this day had really been about. Not recognition for past service, but a commission for future service. Not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter. The ceremony continued, with Jessica and the other summa cum laude graduates walking across the stage to receive their diplomas. But the energy in the stadium had changed permanently. Maria's words had touched something deeper than academic achievement, had reminded everyone present that education was meant to serve something larger than individual success. As Jessica approached to receive her diploma, she paused and looked directly at her mother, sitting now with the other platform guests. She mouthed 2 words that Maria read clearly despite the distance: "Thank you." Not just for the speech, but for the example. For showing her what service really meant. For teaching her that heroism wasn't something you read about, it was something you lived, every day, in choices both small and large. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of names and handshakes, of families cheering and cameras flashing. But for Maria, the most important moment had already happened. She had stepped into the light, told her story, and discovered that recognition wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be used, a platform for encouraging others to serve, to stand up, to make the choice to help when help was needed. As the last graduate crossed the stage and the crowd began to disperse, Maria knew that everything had changed. Not just for her, but for every person who had heard her words and understood that they too had the power to be heroes. That they too could choose service over self, courage over comfort, action over indifference. The desert sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new moments when ordinary people would have to choose between helping and walking away. But today, 30,000 people had been reminded that those choices mattered, that service was a privilege, that heroism was within reach of anyone willing to extend their hand to someone who needed help. It was enough. It was everything. 3 weeks later, Maria sat on her back patio in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the first rays of sunlight creep across the Sonoran desert. The bandages were gone from her arm now, leaving only a thin scar that caught the light when she moved. It would fade with time, but she found herself hoping it wouldn't disappear completely. Some reminders were worth keeping. The world had changed since the graduation ceremony, or perhaps Maria had simply stopped hiding from the world that had always been there. The video of her speech had been viewed 23 million times across various platforms. Interview. Requests arrived daily from news programs, podcasts, veteran organizations, and universities across the country. Her small adobe house had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand what real service looked like. But this morning was different. This morning was quiet. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, who was spending the summer volunteering at a clinic for undocumented immigrants in Tucson before starting medical school in the fall. Morning, Mom. Thinking about you. Changed 3 lives yesterday. Because you taught me courage comes in ordinary moments. Maria smiled, setting the phone aside without responding immediately. Some messages deserved more than quick replies. They deserved the kind of thoughtful response that could only come from stillness, from the kind of peace that settled over the desert in these early hours. The sound of gravel crunching in her driveway broke the silence. A single car this time. Not the convoy of rental vehicles that had brought the 8 veterans to her door 3 weeks ago. Maria recognized the vehicle as it pulled into view, Bobby Thompson's modified van, the one that allowed him to drive despite his missing legs. Bobby maneuvered his wheelchair down the van's ramp and approached her patio with the careful dignity that had impressed her since the day they met. In his lap was a manila envelope, thick with papers. "Morning, Maria," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who had found peace with his place in the world. "Bobby, you're up early." "Old habits." He smiled, positioning his wheelchair at the bottom of her porch steps. "Military time doesn't really leave your system, does it?" Maria descended the steps to meet him at eye level. In the 3 weeks since the incident at the medical center, Bobby had become something of a local celebrity himself. His story, intertwined with hers, had resonated with veteran communities across the nation. But more importantly, he had become her friend, the kind of friend forged in moments when character revealed itself completely. "I brought you something," Bobby said, holding out the envelope. "Letters. Hundreds of them. From veterans, from their families, from people who saw your speech and wanted to say thank you." Maria accepted the envelope but didn't open it immediately. "Bobby, you didn't need to collect these." "Actually, I did. Because you need to understand what you started that day in the parking lot. It wasn't just about defending one old soldier. It was about reminding people that we don't abandon each other, that service doesn't have an expiration date, that standing up matters even when it costs something." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This one came yesterday. I wanted to read it to you myself." Bobby unfolded the letter carefully, his weathered hands gentle with the paper. "It's from a 19-year-old kid in Georgia. He writes, 'Mr. Thompson, I saw the video of what happened to you and how Sergeant Rodriguez stepped in. I've been thinking about joining the military but wasn't sure I was brave enough. After seeing how she stood up for you, after hearing her speech about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, I enlisted yesterday. I want to serve something bigger than myself. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like.'" Bobby refolded the letter and handed it to Maria. "That's what you did, Maria. You didn't just save one veteran from some kids with a knife. You reminded an entire generation what it means to serve." Maria stared at the letter, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with being seen. As an example. It was a burden she had spent 15 years avoiding, but she was beginning to understand that some burdens were meant to be carried. "The Veterans Center wants to offer you a full-time position," Bobby continued. "Director of Community Outreach. They want you to travel, speak at events, help connect veterans with resources. It would mean leaving your quiet life behind. What do you think I should do?" Bobby smiled, the expression transforming his lined face. "I think you should do what you've always done. Ask yourself where you're needed most, then go there." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, a wild sound that reminded Maria of the vastness of the world beyond her small corner of Phoenix. "Bobby, can I ask you something? That day at the medical center, when those kids were threatening you, were you afraid?" Bobby considered the question carefully. "Terrified," he said finally. "But not of them. I was afraid that I had become the kind of person who could be pushed around, that losing my legs had somehow made me less than what I used to be. When you stepped in, when you stood between me and them, you reminded me that my worth wasn't measured by what I'd lost. It was measured by what I'd given." A second vehicle pulled into the driveway, this one a familiar sedan that Maria recognized as Dean Walsh's car. Catherine emerged wearing casual clothes instead of her usual academic attire, carrying a small box and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said as she approached the patio. "Not at all," Maria replied. "Join us." Catherine set the box down carefully and pulled out a bronze plaque, its surface gleaming in the morning light. "The university has commissioned something. We want to install it in the main courtyard, where students pass every day on their way to classes." She turned the plaque so Maria could read the inscription, in honor of Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, who reminded us that heroism lives not in seeking recognition, but in serving others when service is needed most. May her example inspire generations of students to choose courage over comfort, action over indifference, and service above self. Maria felt tears threatening but didn't try to stop them. Catherine, this is too much. No, it's not enough. But it's a start. Catherine's voice carried the same emotion that had marked their reunion 3 weeks earlier. Maria, you saved my life 15 years ago, but what you did at that graduation ceremony was different. You saved something in all of us, the belief that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that service matters, that standing up for others is worth whatever it costs. Bobby reached out and grasped Maria's hand. The question isn't whether you deserve recognition, Maria. The question is what you're going to do with it. Maria looked at these two people who had become so important to her story, the veteran she had defended and the soldier she had saved, both of them testifying to the ripple effects of choices made in moments of crisis. She thought about Jessica. In Tucson, changing lives because she had learned that courage came in ordinary moments. She thought about the 19-year-old in Georgia who had enlisted because he saw what service looked like. She thought about the 8 veterans who had traveled across the country to stand up for her when her qualifications were questioned. I'll take the position, she said quietly. I'll travel, speak at events, help connect veterans with resources. But I have one condition. Name it, Catherine said. I don't want to be called a hero. I want to be called what I really am, someone who made a choice. Because that's what I want people to understand. Heroism isn't a title you earn. It's a choice you make, every day, when someone needs help and you have the power to provide it. The 3 of them sat together as the desert morning unfolded around them, each lost in their own thoughts about service, sacrifice, and the unexpected ways that lives intersect. Maria understood now that her story wasn't ending, it was transforming. From soldier to nurse to mother to defender to speaker to advocate, each chapter building on the last, each choice leading to the next moment when standing up would matter. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from David Chen. Sergeant, just wanted you to know, my daughter decided to join the Peace Corps after watching your speech. Says she wants to serve something bigger than herself. Thank you for showing us all what that looks like. Maria smiled, sliding the phone into her pocket without responding. Some messages didn't require replies. They required action, commitment. The daily choice to serve others when service was needed. The sun was fully up now, burning away the last traces of morning coolness. It was going to be another scorching day in the desert, but Maria felt ready for the heat. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to step fully into the light and trust that her story could help others find their own courage. Because that's what heroes really did, not seek recognition, but use whatever recognition they received to lift others up, to show them that they too had the power to make extraordinary choices in ordinary moments. The circle was complete, but the story would continue. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.